Last week, a case came out of the Superior Court of Ontario in Kitchener regarding a large homeless encampment in that city, and the ruling said that the city could not remove the homeless from that homeless encampment. So we'll take a look at that today. Hello, my name's Nicholas Wansbutter. I'm a lawyer in Stratford, Ontario, Canada, and welcome to Don't Talk TV. Now, as many viewers no doubt know, there's a number of challenges facing Canada in recent years, and especially in the last year. We've heard a lot about the opiate crisis, so-called, and some of the somewhat interesting approaches to that. Maybe we'll look at that in another episode if there's some interest. There's also been a large increase in homelessness, which I'm sure a lot of viewers can understand why that might be happening with job loss, people who lost businesses over the last couple of years, and the skyrocketing price of housing. As a result of all this, in Kitchener, about a 45-minute drive east from Stratford, where I practice, there's been a large homeless encampment set up on Victoria Street near the downtown area that the city has been trying to clear out for quite a while. And their eviction notice to the people living there was challenged in court, and this made some headlines in the news. So here we have a CBC article dated January the 28th of 2023 entitled, "Court Rules Region of Waterloo Can't Evict People from Encampment Due to Lack of Shelter Space." It says here that the Ontario Superior Court of Justice has declined the Region of Waterloo's application to have tenants and living spaces removed from a property it owns at 100 Victoria Street in downtown Kitchener. In a decision of more than 50 pages long, Justice M.J. Valente said the people living at 100 Victoria Street encampment were not in breach of the region's bylaw on public conduct on regionally owned property, and dismissed the region's application for injunctive relief under Section 440 of the Municipal Act, which would have allowed it to evict residents. So Valente cited the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and said the legal remedies sought by the Region of Waterloo were against the residents' rights to life, liberty, and security of the person because of a lack of shelter space in Waterloo Region. So let's take a look at the decision itself to see what Justice Valente had to say about this. So I have the case up on my screen here. It's the Regional Municipality of Waterloo and persons unknown and to be ascertained. January 27th, 2023 decision. As always, I'll put in the show description the link to this case if you want to look at it yourself. Page 32 is where Justice Valente begins his discussion of the charter rights and their impact in this case. So he cites the Supreme Court of Canada for the principle that the right to life is engaged in a narrow set of circumstances. The Supreme Court there said, in short, the case law suggests that the right to life is engaged where the law or state action imposes death or an increased risk of death on a person either directly or indirectly. As some British Columbia cases that the judge reviewed, as well as a case called Black, Justice Valente concluded that the ability to provide adequate shelter for oneself is a necessary of life that falls within the right to life protected by Section 7 of the Charter. Like Justice Ross in Adams BCSC, I have reached the conclusion because the very clear and uncontroverted evidence before me is that exposure to the elements without adequate shelter can result in serious harm, inducing death. Seems fairly common sense that exposure to winter weather in Canada could result in serious harm or death. He then went on to find that because the bylaw prohibits the erection of shelter protection that is necessary to protect homeless individuals from risk of serious harm, and there is currently inadequate shelter beds in the region, I conclude that it violates the charter-protected right to life. So it's based on this two-pronged. One, that shelter is necessary, and two, that there's inadequate shelter beds in the region. So really, where else are these people going to go? They have no choice. They have to live somewhere. And he summed that up again in paragraph 101, said, I've found as a fact that there are not enough accessible shelter beds for the region's homeless population. If evicted from the encampment, the residents will likely be forced to live in the rough or set up camp somewhere else because there is an insufficient supply of low-barrier accessible beds in the region. In these circumstances, creating shelter to protect oneself is, in my opinion, a matter critical to any individual's dignity and independence. The region's attempt to prevent the homeless population from sheltering itself interferes with that population's choice to protect itself from the elements and is a deprivation of liberty within the scope of Section 7. So it's an interesting decision. It's fairly unprecedented. I mean, we've, in Canada, up until now, as I understand the law, granted I haven't practiced much civil law, is that there are such things as individual property rights, so people are allowed to have their own property, and the state is allowed to have its own property as well without people just taking it over for themselves, which is really what this homeless encampment has done. I can't help but feel there may be a bit of politics to this. Homeless people, they're allowed to camp there, but if someone just showed up and built a house there, quite certainly the decision would not be the same. So it's an interesting case decided on some specific facts, but I think the thing to really take home from this decision is it really shows how the courts are not able to solve deeper societal issues. And that's something that I've said on a number of topics. Certainly things like the COVID-19 lockdowns, other things that people are concerned about in our society, these are things that the courts really aren't equipped to deal with. They're things that need to be dealt with at a broader societal level. I've quoted Mark Stein, who says that politics are downstream of culture, and I would say that the laws are downstream of politics. So it all really goes back to culture. And that's why there aren't going to be any quick lawsuits to solve some of the really deep issues in Canada. It's going to take a waging of a cultural war, which in my view, there's been a culture war, but only one side has been fighting it for the last several decades, and that's why they've won almost total victory at this point. What we need to do is look at root causes, which the court cannot deal with. The court, at best, is a band-aid solution. So what are some of the root causes at play here? I think this article from the Epoch Times is worth looking at when considering the homeless crisis and the price of housing that I referenced earlier. Canadian Immigration, the Real Newcomer Numbers is the title of this article. They have a picture of the Minister of Immigration, Sean Fraser, arriving for question period. But here, let's see what the Epoch Times have found out. So they say the federal government has been touting the record numbers of immigrants arriving in Canada, but the over 431,000 it cites is in fact far less than half the number of newcomers who came to the country last year. Once combined with non-permanent residents, the number of newcomers in 2022 amounted to an estimated 955,000, which represents, quote, an unprecedented swing in housing demand in a single year that is currently not fully reflected in official figures, unquote, according to a January 25th CIBC report. And it says that the number of new international arrivals in 2023 could reach 1 million, the report said, which in a country like Canada with fewer than 40 million people living here before 1 million newcomers, that's a significant change. You can see how that's going to have a massive impact, not just on housing prices, but jobs, strain on infrastructure, strain on healthcare, and many of the other things that we see that we're having major problems with in Canada right now. These are things that are not talked about in most circles. These are things that are not major election issues, but they're the root causes, and they're root causes that the courts aren't equipped to deal with. By a lawsuit, it's going to take a lot of hard work, and I've referenced in previous episodes my recipe for that hard work. Check out episode 83, among others. And that's what it's going to take. So that's why I thought this is an interesting case to look at, because it's a bit of a novel application of Section 7, an application of Section 7 that some people might wonder, where has that been the last 3 years? But also because it really does point to what I keep harping on here in this episode, is that quick lawsuits are not going to solve some of the real problems that our country is facing. Now, this video is not legal advice. If you need legal advice, call a lawyer. You can call another lawyer or myself. My website and phone number are listed below. If there's topics you'd like to see me cover on this channel, please send an email to the email address listed below or leave a comment in the comment section. And if you found this video at all interesting, helpful, or informative, please consider liking, sharing, subscribing, and following us on social media.